I am Andrew Giobbi. I'm the regional manager for Sprinturf, a company that's been around since 1998. You have a Go Sprinturf sheet there that's kind of loose within those folders that you can sort of follow along. That's a brief just clip of who we are as a company. So I manage New England for the company, been involved in millions of square feet of synthetic turf, been almost exclusively with Sprinturf to this point. So just wanted to kind of walk you guys through exactly who we are, what we've done in the region, and hopefully you can get to know us a little bit better. So going throughout this process, I think it's important just to understand that there's going to be a ton of information here. So I wanted to briefly discuss just kind of what to focus on in terms of what you're looking to select for a synthetic turf, and hopefully we can hone in on a product, so on and so forth. So proven products since 1998. We started out as just a manufacturer of turf, and we still are manufacturer all the way through. So everything from the raw resin pellet all the way up through the install is done with our own W-2 employees. So it's a little bit different the way that we kind of approach things and go about them. We adopted this strategy in 2010, where we said, we're making turf for all these different people. We did some stuff in-house prior to. And then we said, why don't we just go full-on direct mode? We can, control everything and sort of adopt what I call the Starbucks method. So if you go to Starbucks, whether it's in Boston or Seattle or LA, the cup of coffee tastes exactly the same all the time. So with our strategy and the way we kind of implement turf and infill synthetic turf specifically, we do it exactly the same way every single time, because it's just a better understanding of what's underneath there, kind of how you can go about your own maintenance program. It's that consistent basis that you have no matter which field you go to within the region that's going to perform exactly the same way. So that's everything which we'll go over, from sewing our panels together to the way that we put in lines. I heard you guys having a little bit of that discussion here a moment ago. We do it the same way so that there's a better understanding. And it's the same people. Within these folders, you guys have brief resumes of about, I'd say, anywhere from 10 to 20% of the fields that the installers that you're going to have are going to put in. So we don't use subcontractors to put those in. These are the two gentlemen who would be running the crews of, who's going to be installing for you. And that's Tacho and Tim, if you want to flip through those folders. Zero fiber failure. So fiber, we're going to have a lot of focus on the fiber here today, and the reason for that is it constitutes 95% of the field failures that are out there. Fiber falls apart, and then the infill goes with it, and everything sort of falls apart. With that being said, it is a system that we're proposing. So we're not proposing just a product and the infill doesn't matter, or vice versa, but there are tens of thousands of combinations when you get into different pile heights, different ratios, pad, no pad. What does the drainage look like underneath? There's just a million different things that you can do. So as long as we get kind of the basics correct, then we can work our way up through the system to get what's right and safe for you and your athletes. So I do want to pass around a couple of different pieces of turf here. So I'm handing out, these are both manufactured by us. They're just meant to be used as examples, so these wouldn't go in any fields necessarily. And if you would just pass those around. Those are the two different types of fibers that we have within our industry. So the one that he's passing right now is a monofilament turf, and then the other one is what's called a slit film turf, or slit tape. So manufactured in a couple different ways, and they do have a couple of differences between the two. So monofilament turf was popular maybe, 15 years ago or so. So it's meant to look a little bit more like grass, and it's a more pliable fiber. So it's better, it can be better for sports like soccer if it's exclusively made for soccer. That's why someone like the Patriots has that for the Revolution. Now, the slit tape that is coming up the back end here, the slit tape is meant to be the beefier of the two fibers, I guess. It's going to last about 10% longer over the course of time, which in this case could be another year. And it was more adopted sort of in that mid-2000s. So slit tape is manufactured in sheets, and then we fibrillate it and allow it to kind of open itself up, and I fibrillated that for us here. It's just a denser weave within it. It's meant to sort of hold the infill together a little bit more. You're going to get less infill splash. So naturally, Sprinturf, we came up with the dual fiber product. This is a dual fiber, meaning it's a combination of both of those, and there's a number of different ways that you can go about that. Of our roughly 200 fields in New England, I'd say 90% of them are the dual fiber product, and that's what I'd recommend for you guys. And then depending on sort of your maintenance capabilities and what exactly you're looking to use it for and rentability and all of that, we can look at just some tweaks within that to make sure that it's the right fit for you guys. So the dual fiber product that I just passed out is constructed in one of two ways that you can do it. So that is a 3/8 inch stitch gauge, meaning every row is 3/8 of an inch apart. That's the tightest that we can go within our industry. And I'm not sure if you had this conversation before, but we can do it both ways. We just got finished up at St. Thomas Aquinas in New Hampshire, where we did it with a single needle construction on a 1/2 inch stitch gauge. I think both are good systems. I prefer this one though, and I'll tell you why. So if you, and I'll pass this one out as well, but if you flip that piece of turf over, the way that it's constructed is that every stitch that we put through here is a stitch, a back stitch, and a stitch through, and then it repeats that cycle. So if you're looking at that piece of turf and you flip it over, and then I have a piece of monofilament that I'll pass around that's 3/4 of an inch, it's the same amount of stitches. So why that's important is now every 3 inches there are X amount of stitches on this one with a 3/4 inch stitch gauge, and we just took one of those rows and shifted into the other. Now what does that mean for you and your athletes from a safety perspective? To me, it's going to play drastically different going with the grain here versus going against the grain. In 2010, there was a study done where they rolled a soccer ball out that was meant to travel 20 feet. So going with the grain there, it went 22 feet, and going against the grain, it went 18. Whereas on a uniform stitch gauge, it goes 20 feet and 20 feet. So is it that pronounced once we get infill in the field? No. But from a footing perspective, there's nothing for me to push off against in some of these directions. It just plays differently. So from a common sense standpoint, that means everything in the world. And the reason why I bring that up is you can't get as much of that. You certainly can't get it against a 3/4 inch stitch gauge, but you're even working against that when you're looking at a 1/2 inch stitch gauge. So that's why I would go against it. The argument for a single needle is there's the understanding that it can be streaky when it goes every other needle. I'll show you 200 fields that can show you otherwise. So we can take a field trip to some of these. You guys can tell me which ones you like, or if you want to guess prior to which one it is. I have a hard time doing that, so I would challenge that for sure. So let me back up a step from, if we go down to number 4 here with the technology innovator. So our CEO, Ron Reddy, he ran a division of Exxon Chemical back in the 90s before he got into turf. So the reason why that's important is it sort of plays into our history and our success that we've had with no fiber failures. So this history has really stemmed from a couple of studies that were done in the early 2010s, one prominently done by Penn State and one done by Michigan State. And then Tennessee is working on another one to sort of update that now. The number one factor when it comes to the longevity of turf, because everything looks great on day one, right? The longevity factor really came down to one of two different things. It was fiber. It was the chemicals that you use for the raw resin pellet, and then it was the face weight that you had. So how many ounces of yarn per square yard that you have. So there was a bare minimum that you would certainly want to meet that would get you to that 8-year mark, depending on the use that you have. And then the raw chemicals that you would use. So let me take a step back here and show you how turf is made. Oh, of course, it's in the last pocket. So I have 2 vials coming around right now. So the white one is raw resin. So this is the raw resin pellet that we get from Dow or Exxon, depending on the fiber type that we have. And then this is our master batch. So these two, those two are sucked up pneumatically, melted down, mixed together, and then forced through either a spinneret plate or our slit tape machine that pushes it through, immediately into freezing cold water to help it congeal, settle, and then we can get on with our process with tufting and coating. So what Penn State found is with that white tube that you have in your hand, there are generally 3 different grades of that you can get. There's a C4 resin, a C6, and a C8 resin. So the C4 resin is 4 connection points, 6, 6, 8, 8. And without getting it too complicated here, the C8 resin and the raw quality that people used have done drastically better over time. That's what gets you to, that's what's gotten us to having the most fields in the ground that have lasted 10 years or longer on a percentage basis, which we take very seriously. Because when it comes to ROI for you guys and spending this kind of money, what else would you be looking for past safety other than the return that you're going to get knowing that you're going to spend this amount of money anyway? So
that process guarantees you have a uniform color through the blade of grass. So if this breaks or snaps, you're not seeing white edges, you're not seeing scrape, you're not seeing anything but green, no matter what happens to that blade.
Correct. And we pull, being the manufacturer of the turf, we pull it off the machine every 2 hours to make sure that it falls within, I think it's 0.02%. I can check on exactly what the measure is, but we'll pull it off the machine, we'll check it, and then we'll go back. That's why there's a consistency factor there when it kind of sort of just plays into our business model, where we want everything to be the same every single time. And then if we make a change, it's company-wide. Like a couple years ago, we used lime green and field green, or we switched to lime and field because that's where the market sort of went. And then those were our 2 primary colors that we would be making our greens in, as opposed to we had this olive color that, I don't want to talk about it. It wasn't my favorite. So I think, so the recommendation that I would have, given the givens of what I have right now, knowing the sports that you guys are going to play, knowing that it's a town field, knowing that it's going to be open for the public, I think face weight's probably the #1 most important thing that you can do to get it to a certain point. And you can see within that folder, I recommended a 46-ounce product, AB construction. And then there's another product in there that I did want to discuss. So this is a real piece of turf that I pulled from Trinity Catholic High School in New Hampshire. That's a 52-ounce product at 2 inches. And it has a thatch layer in between. So this is assuming that you're using sand and rubber, and we'll get to infill in a moment. But the thatch layer is meant to be like a micro bed that runs through the infill that helps hold it together. So if you tell me that it's like the way that roots would work, essentially. If you tell me that, hey, we have limited capability of what we can do from a maintenance perspective, I wish we could throw more man hours at it, we just can't, I would push you toward this product here, because that's going to help encapsulate and keep the infill from moving and your cleats digging down into the backing, really damaging the turf. Also the turf exposure that it would have from laying over. So the grooming process can be simplified as we want to reallocate the infill and stand it all back up. Stand up the fibers so you're playing on top of them and not on the sides. So with that, this helps with that process. I think the downside is it's all polyethylene, so 52 ounces below or above is essentially the same. Keep in mind that 70% is below anyway. But with that being said, I think it can just help aid with that process, and I think it makes it more of an individual product. It's very common in a sport like baseball or a sport like soccer where infill level is critical to ball roll and foot strike. So in general, I think it could be a good fit if you tell me that maintenance man hours are going to be an issue for you all. Okay.
Does that affect the G-Max performance over time?
So indirectly, yes, it'll help it.
It'll help.
Because I'm only concerned about the highest G-Max score within a field, not what this spot is and the best that I can do within it, because as a player, I don't know where I'm going to fall. So any way that the number one thing that you can really do in general to help G-Max is to make sure that the infill levels are the same on day 1 as they are in year 4, or as they are in year 8. So the way that we can really do that is, as much as I can keep that infill level together and keep the fibers from degrading, then yes, it'll naturally help that. You guys asked about pads, and I think this will be kind of a lead into the discussion that we have with infill. We don't do our own pads. We like to focus on turf. Those are the 3 types of pads that are probably most common that we've used. So there are different variations with the different companies. The white and black spotted one is a company named Brock. That's probably been the most common in New England and throughout the country. The rubberized black one is called N-Plast, which is relatively new, though it's been around for 5 or 6 years now. And then the last one, the multicolored one, is Schmidt's. So those are different heights and thicknesses and everything else, and they sort of provide different things. But in general, if you're asking my opinion on pad, I think it's a no-brainer yes. We can make a great system without it, but I think it's a no-brainer, and I'll tell you why. The pad allows me to put more sand in the field if you're going sand rubber. What that does is that helps with, cleat strike with the field and allows my players to have the correct amount, not too much or too little, but the correct amount of cleat release. You've seen an uptick in the NFL with ACL injuries and so on and so forth. Well, I talked to the gentleman a couple weeks ago that did all the testing out on MetLife Stadium. And without getting too picky with it or anything, the heavy sand use that you would have in a field being combated with a pad tests out completely fine. So I think it has more to do with the direction that people are running in the stitch gauge that we talked about earlier, where it feels sticky, as the 49ers coach had mentioned. That would be my opinion on it. But with these pads, I think that the pad allows you to do some things with the sand. It also allows you to be comfortable at 2 inches without having to feel like you need to be really meticulous with how you maintain that turf to make sure that you keep enough infill in there. Okay, so pad will add about, let's say, about $1 per square foot, and it'll last. It's a 25-year warranty. I don't think there's enough data out there to really tell you, how many life cycles of turf that it'll last. I think if someone would tell you 3 right now, as opposed to 2, I think it's more of a guess at this point. So in my opinion, it's 25 years. We've had like elastic layers, E-layers, that have been underneath the field that we did at Worcester State, for instance. So when we did that field last year, it was on its 3rd life cycle of turf. We lifted up the existing turf. We patched the E-layer that was there, which is essentially what you do with any of these. It's just a panel or a patch of something like that. And then you put new turf back down on top. What these can do is help with drainage sometimes as well. So the drainage channels that you see, you can get it on any of these. But generally speaking, the drainage per hour on something like that with the horizontal drainage channels takes care of any problems that you have underneath the field. In fact, what some designers are doing now is they're putting down no stone, a concrete pad, and then putting pad with drainage channels on top of it, and that's all of your drainage, runs it right off with like a 0.5% grade or something like that.
So that's the what's the grade from center line to edge What's that? Crowd
Typically
look like?
0.5%.
Yeah, 0.5%.
So, yeah, and that's with or without stone underneath. I don't want to convolute the conversation by kind of bringing that up, but that's more of a specialty that, you know, some people are coming up with. You know, even going over stone, you still want that 0.5% grade. In case things back up, that'll take care of all the drainage needs that you would have. So that's a similar pad that we put in on, I'd say, 7 or 8 fields within New England this year, and then we did Brock with another 9 or 10. And then I think we only did 1 without a pad. So that's pretty standard of where the New England market has been. Millbury High School, I just came, as a matter of fact, this piece of turf came from Millbury that I cut this morning, has this pad. The difference is it's 3 millimeters shorter or less thick. So from a safety perspective, I'll tell you this is the most expensive in general. It'll give you the most in terms of what you get in return from like head injury criteria or GMAX or anything else. But GMAX isn't pass-fail. I just want to touch on this briefly. The data that I've seen from some of the pad companies is 55 GMAX with nothing else being encumbered, no hand movement, nothing. Just 55 is the amount of force that your head goes into the turf. Is like getting punched in the head from a military person. So even though that's on the drastic low end of GMAX, it's still something that can impact in terms of head injuries. So over the course of time, when that number goes up, it's only getting worse from there. We're trying to deter that and find the right balance between what's too soft to run on and what's great to play on versus what's safe to fall on. So we really just want to create something that's running on concrete and falling on a mattress. And that's a bell-shaped curve where I think the pad allows you to do that, and I would recommend that you go in that direction.
For the infiltration, so we're right next to a wetland.
Okay.
So for us to have the field shed the water, it would be less desirable from a conservation perspective than for the field to absorb the water and let it slowly not overflood the adjacent wetland.
Mm-hmm.
So if that were the case, which pad would be the better recommendation to actually let the water through into a stone system below?
I think the N-Plast pad is going to do the least in terms of holding that water in there, and that'll affect the infill that you would desire as well.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a balancing act that you'd have from an infill standpoint. Sorry, it's mask keeps falling out. It's sort of a balancing act that you would have. One of the problems that we've had within synthetic turf is the heat, I think, in general. To me, that's the one big thing that if you can perfectly maintain grass, put it in a grass field. No doubt about it. But because most people cannot, if you're talking to me about water, the organic infills that are going to cool the field, and we make our own. We make green clay that you'll see all over the state. It's what I would recommend for you guys and what I planned on talking about here today. But if that's an issue for you guys and you don't want water leaking down in slowly, maybe it's not the right fit for you. Maybe, you know, maybe we discover something here that we can go in another direction. Okay. What I do think that if you think oh, you guys already have the geofill here, but anyway, that's a different form of it. So that is a company called La Manta that has turned into green clay about 10 years ago now, or a little bit more than 10 years ago. We put that in at Weaver High School down in the Hartford area. We did it at the Hillside School, which I've got photos of. That's not too far from here. We've got it maybe 10 different areas that we have. So we have, the Hillside School loves that product, and I'll tell you why. Without the thatch and the turf, that essentially acts like a thatch. So not only are you going to get the cooling properties, that's the closest thing to natural grass, but it's also interweaving within itself and creating a pool table flat surface for field hockey's going to love it. Soccer's going to love it. any ball roll where ball is interacting with the ground at all times and rolling across the turf, those sports are going to love it. And then from a foot interaction standpoint, who wouldn't love the consistency that's going across? I think that's the biggest argument that you can make for the organic infill. If conservation and water is an issue, I think you'd have to balance those two. And then we'd have other options for that as well.
What's the additional cost?
So are you given that, so I'm recommending a pad. I would
Yep.
tell you to definitely go with a pad no matter what. So if you're taking the pad away from it, on a 2-inch turf, I want 2 pounds of that, and then we'll replenish as we go, as needed. I'd say you're increasing by 65 to 70 cents per square foot.
So $60,000.
So yeah, $60,000 I think in total for the field. And then it depends if you want to pay for the product up front to replenish it if needed, or pay as we go. I'd recommend you pay as you go, just if nothing else, is because I don't want you to sit there with an extra 30 bags of infill just around your campus somewhere, and it sits there out in the sun. I just think it's better off if we kind of do it as we go here. So that product would be 2 pounds of that, and then 3 to 4 pounds of sand. I think 3 pounds with a 2-inch turf has been sort of the most common system. And then when it comes to the recyclability of it, take it out, put it in your garden, put it around. It's a good story anyway.
Can you say that recommendation weight again?
For the weight distribution of the two?
Yeah, it's 2 pounds green fill.
So 2 pounds of green clay,
Yep, green play, yep.
and then 3 pounds of
3 pounds sand.
sand.
Okay.
Yep. Sand obviously just providing that ballast. When we put in green clay, it's going to look admittedly awful day one, and then it'll all settle in. That's the settling factor that it has, but it's more like grass where it's meant to change properties. And that's where the benefits of it come from, which is the proper cleat release, the proper foot interaction with the turf, the right cooling properties. But it'll take a week or two to get there, and usually we get some of those complaints. So it's just to kind of forewarn you if that's the direction that you decide to go. I want to back up a step to the installation process, and I talked about sort of the way that we go about the installation process being the same all around the country, and I just want it to be known about the materials that we use. So I passed around one of these pieces of turf, and you guys have all felt the other ones, but this has as a backing material. If you pick that up, it feels a little bit like a dish rag. It's just going to fall in your hands. There's really nothing substantial there. The reason for that is this is the form of backing that they use. They use 2 13-pig polybacks. Okay? This is the most inexpensive way, to my knowledge, that you can put a piece of backing of turf together. And to combat that, to keep the field from wrinkling, you would have to put a ton of infill in there. That's where like 9 or 10 pounds of infill come into play. That allows someone to stitch it a little bit further apart, which we already said was probably not the way to go. But these 2 13-pig polybacks are the only thing standing in between either the pad or the stone that's underneath and the infill that you have. So I would steer clear of that whenever you can. That's not being done for you. This is what's in the rest of these pieces of turf. It's a 3-part system. It's got a piece of compressed fiberglass in between and a little bit more substantial polyback in there to help us with our stitching of the turf. So when we go to stitch into that turf, there are a couple of different ways that you can go. But staying on backing for a moment here, the backing that we have versus the 2-part backing, there's about a 7 cent per square foot difference, which over the course of a field, of course, is, I want you to be aware of that and what you're going to get in return. To me, it's the best 7 cents per square foot that you can spend on something like this, is keeping that line straight, keeping everything together, keeping my football field at exactly 100 yards instead of stretching to 101 or 102. Okay? The way that we would speaking of stitching, there are two ways that you can put together the primary seams that you would have. So we're going to get out, we're going to pin the middle of the field, and then we're going to work our way out with the green from there before we get into doing any sort of inlays, and we'll get there. These are the two different methodologies of stitching that you can use. This started back when infilled synthetic turf started, and it evolved into this one. This is a chain stitch. It's used in the feed bag industry. If I pull the correct stitch on this, the whole thing flies wide open. Okay? So with this, every piece of turf is made 15 feet, 2 inches. So they take the salvage 2 inches, they go green to green, and then they sew it together with their cart sewer, and they flip it over, and you have 2 pieces of turf that are together. Pass it around so you guys can see. The way that we choose to do it, and the way that most of the industry has chosen to do it, is we invested the money in the new machinery for stitching. So this is more like the way that, you know, my shoes are tied together. Okay? So even if someone comes in and starts to vandalize this, they'd have to go back and forth, and it would be, you're going to have more fun like dealing with this area out here than you will with the actual seams themselves. So the way that we stitch, it took a little bit of money for us to spend up front to be able to properly sew our seams together. That meets all of the proper criteria that you have for something like one turf concept, or you know, some of these like generalized areas where they have to take a certain amount of weight for them to pull apart. But I'd say anytime you can, you want to sew with the cart sewer. So after I get done with our seams, now it comes down to lines. So with the lines, we have a couple of different ways that we can put them in. Any line on your field that is straight and lasts the full extent of the roll, the 5-yard lines, the sidelines for soccer, anything that doesn't have a curve or a bend in it and is the extent of one roll, we're going to tuft in at the factory. It's going to be one piece of backing. This is utopia for us. This is what everyone wants. It's one less cut in the field. Although minimum risk, it's still a risk for you to have an additional cut in the field. That fiber's made in white, stuffed it into one piece of backing. Anything that is not has one of two options. Everything's done with glue, and it's just a matter of which methodology you prefer. The old way was to take sheep shears, shear the fibers down, and then take a line, a 4-inch line, and put 4 inches of glue down and glue it right on top. Since then, the NFL has outlawed it. It's 2 pieces of backing, so this turf is naturally going to be higher. What people do oftentimes is take that same sheep shears, shear off the top to make up for the height difference, the 1/8 inch or whatever it is. There's always a flap there. As you know, as someone who has seen enough fields at this point in my career, they don't go all the way to the edge, and the reason that they don't do that is it takes hours and hours to pick that glue off of these fibers. So anyone who does that is trying to do it so that they can use 4 inches of glue instead of what we prefer and what we do on all of our fields, which is 12. This has a piece of seaming substrate on the back, seam tape. These are 2 different pieces of turf that have the same stitch gauge in between them when we cut it out, being 3/8 of an inch in this case. And why that's important is we're using all the same guys to install all these fields, and we monitor everything that they do. So it's the same stitch gauge here as it is in the middle of one of those rolls as it is on the sideline or wherever you are in that field. And we already talked about uniformity going across the field. So 12 inches of seam tape, 12 inches of glue, and then essentially 3 pieces of turf. So we have the 2 pieces here. We cut out that hash mark, and then we put it right on top.
That's what we specified.
Did specify that.
Yep.
Okay.
This is the kind you want?
Yeah. What's the closest comparable field to what we're trying to do here?
Putting infill aside, we did, well, Westfield State, that's within 45 minutes or so. And then Worcester State's probably a little bit closer. St. Mark's is close, and then the Hillside School, which I had mentioned with Green Play. Dana Hall's a little bit further from you guys, but Northbridge is probably a good comparison.
Is there a recreational field that you've done with this 46 ounce?
In Franklin, we have the field that's right down on the pond there. I can get you the exact name of that field, but it's for the town. It's meant for that use. It's got a coated rubber infill instead of straight rubber, but it's probably the closest comparison for a town field that we would have. The city of Worcester, we did a field for colleges and stuff like that, but I'd say either Worcester or Franklin would be one of the two fields to go to.
If you can get me addresses.
Yeah, I'll send you our list and I'll let you pick from there. Or if you have children or somebody within the building or something that played on a field that they like, that would work. So, and those fields are a couple of years old as well. I don't want to send you to just brand new. Northbridge is brand new. No matter who puts that field in, it's going to look great day one. So I don't want that to kind of bias the way that you would see a field and then send you to St. Mark's. That's an now 9-year-old field that's held up great. It's one of the ones that I'd like to point you to say, hey, this is what it looks like in year 9, but there are a few reasons for that. They're very good at the process, the year in, year out. We do an annual checkup with them like we'll do with everybody. But from that standpoint, I think most of these fields, so these are all, with St. Mark's is a slip film only field, but the rest of them are dual fiber, right around that 2-inch mark, maybe 2 1/4 for Westfield State. Okay.
So how many lines can you put in for like field types in the factory? How many fields can be ready to go at any day versus having to be painted or changed for the field use?
So when you say painted, do you mean
Or
inlaid or cut in or anything?
So as a recreational field as opposed to a dedicated sport. So and specifically for this field, it's being designed as one soccer field, but we know that the most use that it may get is a dual smaller kid soccer field in the opposite direction. So how do those two lines go for those two different field types, soccer and for the whole field, and then 2 smaller soccer fields within it?
So the common lines that you would have between the two you would just select which one you want it to be the dominant sport. So if you're telling me that youth soccer is 3x more likely to use the field or 5x or whatever it is, then I'd probably make that the dominant line. But red lines or white or whatever you want to do, and you have those going just perpendicular, and then where the common lines meet up, you would just have whichever dominant sport you select. So typically on a football field, I believe football is inlaid on this, is that correct?
Probably. But
probably.
Yeah.
So all of those 5-yard lines are going to be tufted in at the factory, if that's the route that you guys decide to go. Any common lines that you would have, and usually that's how it is, I wouldn't recommend going off center with them. Any common lines that you would have, you tell me the order in which takes priority, and then it's really dealer's choice after that in terms of what you would want to do. Some companies will say 4 and no more, paint the rest. And I don't think that's right. I think it's more what my eye sees as beautiful art with like Picasso or something is not necessarily what you would see, and it's not my field, it's your field. We're just a partner in that. So whatever you guys recommend. We've done up to 6. I personally think it's loud, but to me 3 or 4, I wouldn't go too much past 4.
What Robin is getting at is it's kind of a unique situation. The field the big field is going to play longitudinally, east-west call it, but it's going to occasionally be broken down to a north-south split down the middle. So we play 2 soccer games simultaneously.
Right.
So we can stitch north-south and east-west, I guess.
Of course. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
those two would really be the priority, and then football after. So the most usage is going to be the 2 sports, but that soccer, we have 2 entirely separate kind of age groups. So that's my concern.
I think it's important to note with something like this is any sports that have a better chance of changing over time, I'd probably lean toward painting. So men's and women's lacrosse that could unify at some point, or I don't know how far along they are. It seems like they've been talking about that one forever, but like USA Soccer back when they had the old coach there, was it Jorgen Klinsmann? Sorry, I don't want to have that recorded that I don't know who it was, but they were talking about taking on more of the European style of things, where they would have different sizes of fields for as you get older, kind of like something like baseball would do, where they have different sized diamonds. Something like that, I would lean more toward painting. We got so deep in the weeds at this with a field we just put in 2020, which was at the New Hampton School up in upstate New Hampshire, that they just said, forget it, put it all green, we're going to paint them. And they did, and it was great, and they liked it. It will cost you more, so I think there's a balance there anyway, but I would probably lean toward, we know football's not going to change, we're going to put that in. We know soccer, it has a little bit of leniency with it right now, and typically something like Massachusetts, where they changed their hash marks a number of years ago, 5 years ago or whatever it was, to meet the college standards to try to take away some of those hits in the middle of the field. Things like that happen, but they give you some leeway to being able to get there. So they say, hey, next time you replace your field, assuming it's within 10 years or whatever it is, they'll allow you to do that, and then we'll work with you all on how to get there and the appropriate measures to take. And I think that's another thing just to point out here. You're not buying a product, you're buying a partnership. So the testimonials that we have and the people that we have serviced here in the last 22 years, go talk to them about us. And I would pick someone who you'd like to work with for 12 years, not just what is conceived to be the best product.
Out of the local projects, was Franklin or Northbridge multi-purpose fields? Can you remember?
They're almost all multi-purpose fields at this point. I think it's what a lot of
town.
town. Sorry?
Did they do the inlay? Trying to think of what
Yes,
ones
so
we should
Franklin, Millbury, all of Northbridge, all of them inlaid at least 3 sports.
Okay.
Colley Stadium in Lowell, we just finished a couple weeks ago, and that one was 2 sports. That's the lowest I've seen in a while.
Gotcha.
So most are inlay, with the exception of New Hampton, of course.
Okay.
But a prep school like that kind of, plays better than rules anyway.
Yep.
Andrew, 10 minutes? Okay.
The maintenance program, I have a little blip in there about maintenance. I don't think there are any hard and fast rules that you would have. We recommend every 100 to 200 hours of use, but what's practical versus what's realistic for you guys, or what's practical versus what's optimal, I should say, it is not always the same. So if you tell me we can only maintain this field once every quarter, let's say, so once every 3 months, it technically does not meet any warranty that's out there, especially some of these kind of fly-by-night warranties that they have. They'll require you to keep logs and everything else. We keep meticulous notes on all these fields. We do quarterly checkups on infill levels, which is really what we're concerned about when it comes to the safety of the surface itself. I think working with somebody and following the proper maintenance protocols within the confines of what you guys can actually do, the equipment that you can afford, the equipment that you have, is really the entire ballgame. Plowing the fields, so if that's, would you guys consider doing that at all?
I hope not.
Yeah,
Everyone says that, and then I get a call in February saying we got to get lacrosse out there. So I did leave just a one-sheeter out of our maintenance manual in these about plowing specifically, so you guys can see it. You know, it's common sense everything. Just put turf tires on anything you would drive on the field. It's not with your F-150. You know, put PVC pipe underneath, but realistically, I'm a phone call away that you would have, and then we just make sure that it's at the right infill levels. You're not taking too much of the infill off of the field, and it doesn't look like a real blizzard off to the side. I mean, that's really what we're sort of steering at. From testing protocols, so without getting too deep into this, we talked a lot about head to surface, Gmax and HIC and all of that stuff, so head injury criteria. As I mentioned, those aren't a scale. Like it's not a pass-fail. It's really a spectrum. So the better that you can make your HIC scores and your Gmax scores over the course of time, the better. It's a completely different measurement as when I go and test like vertical deformation. So the fear that people would typically have, and I don't blame this, is too soft means like I'm running on the soft sand at the beach. It's not the case when it comes to those two measurements specifically. It's really measuring the deceleration of your brain. It's measuring how slowly that the surface itself can take the brunt of it and slow down your brain from moving within your skull, essentially. You can't be too good or too bad with that. When it comes to foot strike, we have a different measurement for it. And I think that's where the pad and then the heavy sand system, so like 4.2 of sand and 2.8 is what we did at Milton Academy. And it's one of my favorite fields that we have, just because it feels great underfoot. And when people get tackled, they're not breaking collarbones. It's, you know, from a Gmax and HIC standpoint, it's elite. So those are the surfaces that we try to focus on. It's the most popular. It's sort of what the market has demanded up here in a very good way. What other questions do you have for me?
Nothing comes to mind at the moment.
In terms of the life cycle, when you go to the removal and replacement stage, what happens to the material that comes up at that time? Obviously the pad will be in 25 years, but anything above the pad that gets replaced, what happens to that material typically?
You have two options. So if you use a sand and rubber system, we've done, I'll give you Reading Memorial High School, Situate, and there were a couple other high schools that have reused the rubber, reclaimed it, and then put it back in. I think that's fine. You can also do an analysis on that with someone like Firefly, a third-party testing agency, to make sure that like microplastics aren't an issue or anything. You can do testing on it, reuse it, put it back in. And for the turf, you can extract the infill and then reclaim the turf to, they're making like fence posts and things like that out of it now. They're shipping it overseas and doing that in Europe. So,
Can you talk about co-op purchasing real quick?
Yeah, we have those options. There's a cut sheet in there for you guys. Cooperative purchasing has become more popular. It's the laws and rules in Massachusetts, I think, are so they only allow you to buy the materials, and then we have to bid out the install. Seeing as we've been a company who does everything from front to back at 95%, we can find another couple, companies to bid on this for you, and then just take the best price. We have used subs in the past to install this under the same parameters that we have. So we'll provide three or four companies, whatever you feel comfortable with. You can buy the materials, and then we can bid everything out. So we have a number of different options there. I think AEPA is probably the most common that you would use in the area. So,
do you guys recommend antimicrobial infill at all?
Say it again, sorry?
Antimicrobial infill?
It depends on the perspective that you have on it. So we've used EnviroFill, so a coated sand, on, I don't know, a dozen different locations within New England. So the antimicrobial spray that they have, or the coating, excuse me, that they have on there is you can select to either have it or pick it without it. Most people are selecting it without it now. I think it's more for public perception, frankly.
When we get to that point, the question will be asked, so.
I think it's more public perception, but there's no presentation I can give to convince an entire town of something. So if that's the route that you decide to go, I think that's fine. Quite frankly, the UV takes care of a lot of it anyway. If these are fields that are essentially just being outside, you're not planning on putting a dome or anything on top of it, then you're fine.
Not yet.
If so, there are sprays and stuff that you can use that have been a little bit more common. But if I'm concerned with water, I may want to stay away from sprays too. That was one of the things that, with COVID, of course, have become very popular.
So with the antimicrobial, if you go that way, you have to continue to go that way, or can you go back? Just let it kind of fade away and not put it back on.
Mm-hmm. So there are certain infills that it comes either within it or not, and it's sort of few and far between. There are only two that come to mind right now that come with that kind of structure within it, which are the two coated ones. So it's coated rubber like you'll see at Franklin, and then the coated sand. And then past that, it's a spray that you can put down on the field. So,
Right, but once you start spraying it, are you stuck spraying it forever now, or does it?
no, that's where
just let
UV
it-
comes in. UV will
Okay.
take care of a lot of that stuff. It's more common for like
Indoor.
the weight rooms and the indoor turf facilities, of course, where you don't have that luxury of being outside and the sun taking care of most of it.
You might correct, additional 80,000, something like that?
For the spray?
For coated infill?
Oh, for the coated infill?
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more than that.
Is it? Okay.
I think it's like 250,000.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
To get the same properties out of it. So we've done it where Ridgefield Academy in Connecticut, which is probably an hour and a half from here, or there was one other place in Massachusetts. It was at the name escapes me. We did half and half. We did 4 pounds of sand and 3 pounds of EnviroFill.
Okay.
They don't warranty the product at that point, though.
Really?
And that's
Okay.
just a risk that they said we're fine taking. But they just want to cut down on that cost a little bit.
Yep.
It's 33 cents a pound roughly for EnviroFill.
Okay.
And it's like, to do it properly and to get the same playing system that you would have here, you need 10 pounds of it. So there's, we can do the math. It's over $300,000 for just the supply of infill.
Do you know what they warranty? How many years for EnviroFill?
For EnviroFill,
Yeah.
it's either 8 or 10. I
8
can
or
check.
10.
I want to say it's 8 just because the coating that they have on there is a little bit different. In my opinion, I think there are better options out there for you. But
Yep.
like they have Safe Shell. The same company has a product called Safe Shell that we did at the Wheeler School in southern Massachusetts. Good product. I mean, it's significantly less in terms of cost. So I'd steer you in a different direction than EnviroFill, though it's fine.
Okay. All right, well, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. And turn this off here. I will send you guys a list of exactly what we have with different infills and different types, and then if you have any questions on it,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, the address of Franklin, because I'll probably go check that out.
Sure. And if I think of one that would be closer, I'd be happy to send you a list of some stuff that you can see as well.